Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Bros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. With me is Kyle Yates. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at KyleYNFL. Yates, what's going on?
Not much, man. I was going to ask you a question. Have you ever had this happen where you wake up, your alarm goes off, you know, early in the morning, you use the restroom, you brush your teeth, you start to get ready for the day, and then you check your phone and it's 3:45 in the morning? Because that happened to me today. I started to get ready because I thought my alarm went off. Nope, didn't. I just woke up, convinced myself that my alarm went off, and started to get ready. And then was faced with this dilemma of like, okay, do I actually just stay up at this point, or do I try it because I'm awake? Do I try to fall back asleep? If I was tags, I probably would have just stayed awake.
Wait, the fact that it was pitch black outside didn't clue you?
I had my alarm set for 5:45. I was going to get up early and work, so it's dark. It was going to be dark then anyway.
That's your first problem, okay? there is no need. Also, I haven't set an alarm in like 7 years because I guarantee you that one of my two kids is in my bedroom at like 6:30 at work, so I know I'm ready to go. But no, that's never happened, and hopefully it never will. But let's talk about what we've got today, because we've got trades, rest of season rankings, all the good stuff, plus some pretty big news that broke about 5 minutes before we started recording. And here to talk about it all with us is Nathan Jahnke from Pro Football Focus. You can find him on Twitter at PFF_Nate Jahnke. That's JAHNKE. Nathan, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Yeah, no problem. I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Obviously, Yates is not doing very well because he's been up for like 40 hours at this point. But it's fine. It's fine. We'll be good. Okay, look, we've got a lot of stuff to get to today, so I want to get right into it. We're going to break down, both of yesterday's games. We're going to talk about some trades. We'll look at some of the most traded players. We'll do some buy low, sell high candidates. We'll talk about some rest of season rankings. Then we'll close with a listener mailbag. But first, I want to remind you guys about our monster giveaway. We've got 11 days until it closes. It closes on Halloween night at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Reminder, a signed black and gold Aaron Jones Packers helmet, a $200 gift card to Pristine Auction, a $200 gift card to Porter Road Butcher, a package of fantasy football goods for your league's champion and last place loser from Trophy Smack, and a 1-month subscription to Fubo TV. Easy to enter this contest. One of three ways. Follow us on Twitter. That's one. Follow us on Instagram. That's two. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasy /fantasy pros, youtube.com/fantasy pros. That's three. You can do all three. You can get 3 entries into it if you want. That's how you do it. Go to fantasypros.com/contest. You can submit to show that you're doing one of those things and be entered. Again, fantasypros.com/contest. Okay, I neglected to mention, by the way, in the intro that Nathan is one of the most accurate rankers. Nathan, where are you this year? You're in the top 10, right? Right now?
I fell down to 13 this past week, but I will see how week 6 turned out whenever.
All right, we need a new guest. Hold on. We need a new guest, please. No, I know you were in the top. You were in the top 10 last year, though. Right?
Oh yeah, I was third last year.
All right. Well, 13th is absolutely remarkable. So you're going to get some good advice, at least, from a couple of us on here. I won't speak for Yates, but let's get into the big news that broke right before we started recording. Tua Tagovailoa has been named the starting quarterback for the Dolphins. Now, the team is on bye this week, so, nothing to do in terms of starting this week. Next week, they are going to get the Rams, followed by the Cardinals and the Chargers. So I guess, Nathan, let's break it down first like this. Is Tua somebody that immediately vaults into a viable potential QB1 rest of season?
I think he is in the right matchups. I don't think he will be every week. Obviously, it's a gamble. Who knows how good he will end up being, but I think he has enough talent around him, and I think the schedule is in a way that there are some pretty favorable matchups for the Dolphins offense going forward. So I think he's someone where if you have an established quarterback, then don't worry about picking him up. But if you do have a questionable quarterback situation, that's when I think you try to target him as a waiver wire pickup.
How about you, Yates? I mean, the first thing that happened when it broke is we said, okay, got to update our rest of season rankings. Where did you slot him in without giving it too much analysis?
Yeah, he's just around like 24, 25 for me. He's not someone that I'm necessarily looking to scramble and pick up, especially given the bye week. But then this, of course, drops Fitzpatrick down. But I do think I agree with Nathan that he can be someone that you can plug in these streaming matchups, these good matchups. But otherwise, probably just wise to just leave him on your waiver wire for right now.
I have him 19th, and that's just the initial gut check reaction before I do my rest of season projection. So I could see him. I think that's around where he's going to slide in. I think his upside basically pushes him above the, Teddy Bridgewater's, Daniel Jones, those types of guys. So I do think he's there. But I agree, for right now, it's not like I'm vaulting him into QB1 status, but I do think that people are going to go pretty crazy over him because everybody likes the really exciting rookie. How about the impact on the rest of the Dolphins here? I mean, they were, Parker hadn't been crazy great, but he was a pretty reliable wide receiver that you could throw out there each and every week. With Jordan Howard inactive, Myles Gaskin had developed into a solid RB2. Preston Williams was starting to come on. So do you think that this change, Nathan, impacts the value of the other skilled players on the Dolphins?
I don't think it does for Myles Gaskin. I think, if anything, they might run slightly more than they had been to ease Tua in a little bit. So Gaskin could see a little bit of a bump. At wide receiver right now, I don't foresee any change, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up finding a particular target that he likes the best. So there could be a point in the season where there's one of the wide receivers who sees more value. They have been rotating guys in and out a lot more than other teams have been. So really, any of 4 or 5 wide receivers could end up seeing more targets than they have been.
How about you, Yates? Gut check, of course. We haven't gone through the entire analysis of what this means, but your gut check, did you move any of the other skill players up or down?
I really didn't. I kind of kept them right around the same range that they had been. So I want to see what Tua looks like in the NFL, because one of the big concerns, or not concerns, but questions that we had with Tua coming in was he was a facilitator at Alabama. And why wouldn't he be with the receiving corps that he played with Jerry Jeudy, DeVonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs. So, he was just simply get the ball out quick, get it into their hands, let them create. And it worked for their offense. They were a fantastic offense. So looking at the receivers that he's got, Devontae Parker, obviously a very, very talented wide receiver. Preston Williams is starting to come on. So they're not on the level, I think, of what those receivers were. Jerry Jeudy, one of the best wide receiver prospects coming into the NFL. I agree with Nathan, though, that he could absolutely lock on to someone like Parker in the short passing game to intermediate passing game and let Preston Williams stretch the field, be that target deep downfield. So I think Parker might actually bump up slightly, but for right now, I kept him kind of the same.
Yep, same thing as me. I didn't move anybody. I certainly could see something, and I do agree that there is the potential for Myles Gaskin to move up a little bit and this to be a benefit. But for now, I've left everybody where they are. Kind of a weird move. I mean, I get it with the bye week, but, they were playing well. They were 3-3. They were in the thick of it. Fitzpatrick was playing well, but it's exciting to see what Tua is going to do. Let's move on to one other piece of news that came out after our waiver wire show. We kind of poo-pooed the Raheem Mostert injury because he didn't look that bad. Looked like he was on the sidelines. But now we find out that it's a high ankle sprain. He is likely to go on IR. Even if he doesn't, he's surely out at least 2 games, maybe 3. So let's talk about how to break down this backfield right now. You've got, you had this weird sort of game. Jeff Wilson was inactive. Jerick McKinnon didn't play particularly well, and then sort of as the game went on, especially in the fourth quarter, it was all JaMycal Hasty. Meanwhile, Tevin Coleman is out there. I don't think he's going to come back this week, but he's on the horizon. So how do you think, Nathan, that this backfield is going to break down with Mostert out?
I think it'll be really interesting to see when Coleman is ready to come back. I wouldn't be surprised if the 49ers were kind of taking their time before with Coleman since they had Mostert, but now with Mostert out, maybe they rush Coleman back a little bit faster. But I think McKinnon will continue to have the third down role that he's had throughout this entire season. And if Coleman isn't ready to come back, I could very well see Hasty taking at least the majority of the first and second down snaps. And the question will be how much of that time McKinnon does get to play, which he did have that role for a week or 2 in there and looked good, but it doesn't seem like the 49ers want him to have that role going forward, putting in so many running backs ahead of him on those first and second downs.
So I'm not going to hold you to it. It's Tuesday. We don't have, I haven't put in my weekly rankings yet. I assume you haven't. Even if you do, that they'll change. But they have New England coming up. Let's assume Tevin Coleman is out. Where do you think, ballpark it, that these guys are going to rank for you for your weekly, let's say, half PPR rankings in just the ballpark?
I think McKinnon probably somewhere in the 20s, mid-20s, ahead of some of the other more complicated running back by committees, and then Hasty somewhere in the 30s probably.
Yeah, that's exactly what my instinct is too. I feel like McKinnon, because of the uncertainty, will probably rank just outside of RB2 range is my guess, like 25th, and Hasty a little bit beyond that. So that was my instinct too. How about you, Yates? How do you see this breaking down?
This is a backfield that I want to avoid if I can. I'll go with McKinnon as the main option, and I agree with Nathan there. Probably in the 20s is where I'll rank McKinnon this week. But Jeff Wilson, he's probably going to be active this week because, again, now you have an opening with Raheem Mostert out. You'll see Wilson activated if Coleman is out. So this is just a messy backfield. You have no idea who's going to get the carries. Did JaMycal Hasty get all of his work because Jeff Wilson was inactive? And is it going to be, you'll see Wilson get 7 carries, Hasty with 5, and McKinnon with 6, but 4 receptions. We just have no idea what this is going to look like. I'm going to try to avoid it if I can.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, we joke about it all the time. Running backs, you have a running back with a pulse, and you're like, I don't really like this guy, but you're like, well, he ranks 25th for me, right? So it's sort of where we go. So it will be interesting. Hopefully we'll get more information as to how this is going to break down as the week goes on. But let's now get into last night's game. Couple interesting games here. Chiefs 26, Bills 17. Let's start with Clyde Edwards-Helaire here. 26 for 161 on the ground, catches all 4 of his targets for 8 yards. So Le'Veon Bell was inactive, as we saw here. Darrell Williams did score the touchdown in this game. What's your outlook on Edwards-Helaire given that Le'Veon Bell is coming back? What's your outlook on him for the rest of the season?
Sure. So obviously it was down a little bit once Bell signed with the team, but it seems like the consensus is people are thinking Bell will mostly take Darrell Williams snaps and maybe take a little bit of Edwards-Helaire's snaps. This game last night definitely helped Edwards-Helaire's chances of continuing seeing the vast majority of the rushing snaps, but I think it'll really depend on how well Bell does in this offense, how much he has left being able to play in a better offense. And I think the best man will end up getting the majority of the carries as we get further into November and December.
So we talked about this right after the news broke. We talked about it on Friday. Yates and I did. Where, just generally speaking, would you have both of these guys slotted in for your rest of season rankings? Because both Yates and I wound up, and that was before this game, with Edwards-Helaire at about, what was it, Yates? About 15th, around there.
I had him at 18, yeah.
You had him at 18. I had him at 15. Is that what you think, or do you think that this game, moves him up a little bit from that rest of season?
I think this game does move him up a little bit, maybe to like the 12 or 13 range.
Okay. How about you, Yates? Did this move the needle for you?
I mean, it moved it slightly, but yet at the same time, I want to see what it looks like with Bell on the field. So, yeah, I'm more optimistic, that CEH is going to keep the majority of the touches, but yet we know that Bell didn't sign just to come in and ride the bench. Like, he's going to get some touches. It's just a matter of what does that look like. Is it as minimal as Darrell Williams' touches and Williams just fades into oblivion, or is it actually where he eats into some of CEH's workload? So that's where I'm at right now. I didn't really move him up too much. He's right around that 16 range for me, but yet at the same time, I want to see what it looks like.
Yeah, that's really where I'm at. I haven't really moved him all that much yet. And look, Bell signed, I think, to win the Super Bowl. I think this isn't necessarily where he would get the most touches, in my opinion. And also, I could be overreacting, but as everyone knows, I'm a Jets fan. I am forced to watch the team a little more closely than any other human being on earth. And Bell did not look good, and maybe he gets rejuvenated, and maybe it was just the stagnant offense, but you saw him running and you just did not, you feel like he left a lot of yards on the table, even on those rare occasions where there were yards. So I'm not that, I don't think Bell is just going to come in and sort of steal too much when you've got a back like Edwards-Helaire, but it is one of these wait and see things. Meanwhile, Mecole Hardman, I mean, one target. Nathan, you tweeted out yesterday. You tweet out a lot of times. You just tweet out snap counts like right after they happen. Just 29 snaps yesterday for Hardman, almost the same as Byron Pringle. I mean, fantasy managers just basically need to stop trying to make Hardman a thing, right? I mean, this isn't going to happen this year.
Yeah, it seemed like the two ways that he could possibly see fantasy value is either overtaking Demarcus Robinson or an injury. We just saw an injury isn't enough to do it, and Demarcus Robinson led the team in receiving yards, so it doesn't look like he's overtaking Robinson anytime soon. And what made the snap counts even worse is Hardman was used more in run-blocking situations than pass situations, where Byron Pringle ended up running more pass routes and was in less on-the-run situations.
I don't get it, but I'm not an NFL coach, so who knows? And Yates, I assume you agree. You could this was like an exciting week. He was ranked as a consensus wide receiver 3, but I assume that you're just good to let him go now, right?
Yeah, I had him in that range for this week. I had him at like 37 or 38 in my rankings, and so I was really optimistic in this matchup. Didn't happen. Yeah, you move on.
All right. Meanwhile, Josh Allen, I mean, he quote-unquote pads his stats a bit, if you want to call it that, at the end of the game. He still has just 122 yards passing. He does have 2 touchdowns. So after those first 3 huge games, 288, 263, 122 passing yards. Is it time to be worried at all about Allen here, Nathan? Or is it just he's still basically a top 5, top 6 QB going forward?
I think I'm worried a little bit to maybe I drop him down to 7th or 8th rest of season at quarterback rather than top 5, but he still has that rushing floor where he's still running with the ball plenty. He's still scoring at least 2 passing touchdowns each game, so I'm still starting him most of the time. He just might not be quite as good as he looked 2 weeks ago.
How about you, Yates?
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement there. I'm a little concerned, but not to the point where I'm dropping him outside of my top 12 because he is rushing the ball more than what he was. I mean, 4 attempts just a couple weeks ago or something like that. Now we saw him make a concerted effort to get the ball, to run the ball here. So that boosts his value up, but yeah, I think I'm a little concerned moving forward.
Meanwhile, let's talk about the running game briefly. Zach Moss, he doesn't play a ton of snaps, but really it's just another ho-hum effort here from Devin. Singletary, 10 for 32 on the ground, 1 catch for 13 yards. Just thoughts on Singletary going forward here, Nathan?
I'm definitely worried about him. I think Moss, as he gets more healthy, will continue to see more of the work. Those first 2 weeks of the season, Moss was playing over 40% of the time, so I think they were just really easing him back in. And one thing that I did see promising about Moss in this game is the Bills only had one play where they were within 10 yards of a touchdown, and Moss was the player. And on that play, Moss was seeing more of the goal line work those first 2 weeks as well. So I think the lack of touchdown opportunities will definitely be hurting Singletary going forward.
Yates, how do you feel about Singletary rest of season ranking?
Yeah, it was a tough matchup, so I wasn't expecting anything crazy out of Singletary in this one, even if Moss did end up playing, which that was a huge question mark, right? Because the last 2 weeks it looked like Moss was, trending to suit up, and then so now he plays, doesn't factor in much, but Singletary sees the majority of the touches and does next to nothing with them. So I've got Singletary right now at 28, and he just continues to move further and further down.
Yeah, I've got him at 27, and again, just like you, continue to move him down. Finally, let's close this game on John Brown. He does suit up for this game. Sees 4 targets, 0 catches. I didn't see the snap count, but he did look like, just from watching the game, that he was out there pretty much the entire game. So is there anything to be concerned about here, or just kind of a rough first game back and a rough game entirely for the Bills, Nathan?
I think it was mostly a rough first game back. He was seeing the vast majority of snaps like he typically does when he's healthy, so I don't think that was the issue. I think it was just the Bills' offense in general. No one was really able to get anything going, so I'm not super concerned about him from this game.
How about you, Yates? Anything to worry about with Brown, or?
No, I'm frustrated because I needed 10 points from Brown last night to win a matchup. That didn't happen, and it was so close because looking at the game, you see one of the first plays of the game, the ball just hit Brown square in the chest, and it fell to the ground, and then the next drive, I think it was, we see John Brown come, a fingertip away from catching in reeling in a long touchdown. So this game could have been very, very different for him. Allen struggled. I don't know if it was the weather. I don't know what the heck happened with Allen, but I'm not super concerned moving forward. He just kind of moves down to this like mid-range wide receiver 3 flex play.
All right, let's get to the second game. By the way, there should be Monday Night Football doubleheaders every week, and I love it. This is what it's like for the West Coast, right? Like the game starts at 5.
It was amazing.
I was like, I love this. I will do this every week. Cardinals 38, Cowboys 10. Couple of interesting, winners here for the Cardinals. Starting, of course, with Kenyan Drake, 20 for 164 and 2 touchdowns. Now that is padded by his late 69-yard touchdown run, but it all counts. Still only 2 targets, no catches in this game. Nathan, are all your worries assuaged now over Kenyan Drake?
I'm not sure if all of them are, but I'm definitely more optimistic about him than I was a day ago. I think it was really interesting, especially late in the game when he had his long run. That was a point in the game where the Cowboys were starting to put in their backups. They had their third string running back in after that drive, where the Cardinals instead were trying to get him to that 100-yard mark. So it seemed like the Cardinals were really trying to help Drake and seemed to be wanting him to do well. So I think since the Cardinals still seem committed to Drake, that helped me be more optimistic about his future.
And are you then moving Chase Edmonds down? Because he was a guy who was rising in rest of season rankings, thinking that he might get even more of the work. But conversely, I assume since Drake is kind of, padding where he is in rest of season rankings, that Edmonds probably is more of a loser from this game, right?
Exactly. I think that's true. I think a little of it was the game script that the Cardinals were winning so much, so they were using their running back a little more than the receiving back. So I think Edmonds should put up better numbers than he did in this one, but I'm less optimistic of Edmonds taking over the main role in the near future.
How about you, Yates? Are you also basically saying like, all right, definitely Drake? I mean, of course he had a great game. So Drake, big winner, Edmonds a big loser?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily where I'm like wheels up for Kenyan Drake and now let's talk about him as a top 10 back again where he was in draft season. But I messaged you guys last night watching the game. I was like, is Drake running with more purpose tonight or am I just imagining things? And, Tags was able to chime in and say, no, he looks great. So I think moving forward, we saw a more concerted effort for the Cardinals to get him the ball moving north and south rather than east to west. And so I think that was huge for his outlook moving forward. He looked healthy, didn't see any issues with his ankle or cutting, and which was a question mark that we had talked about on this podcast before. Chase Edmonds, I was never buying into Chase Edmonds. I don't know why he was ranked at 23 in ECR last week. That was way too high for me for someone who has only seen 8 to 10 touches every single game. So I think that Edmonds, yeah, he's a fine backup, insurance running back to have on your roster if you can afford it, but otherwise just cut him loose. He's not seeing the touches.
How about Christian Kirk here? I mean, Yates had mentioned, you really liked him on the waiver wire because you love the matchup. Yeah. Only 3 targets, only 2 catches, but 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. I had not seen the snap count yet as we recorded this, but again, Kirk looked like he was out there a little more than usual just from the eye test. So, Nathan, how do you view, is Kirk a huge winner here?
Sorry, I lost you for a second there, but I think you were asking about...
Oh, sorry, Kirk's I'm sorry. I was asking, Kirk. Sorry, that happens sometimes. Is Kirk a huge winner for you here?
I think he was, even though he didn't see a lot of targets, but the snap counts were fairly interesting for him. And that typically in the 2 wide receiver sets, the Cardinals have been sticking with Hopkins and Fitzgerald all season long. But this game, they put Kirk in for the 2 wide receiver sets instead of Larry Fitzgerald. So... that'll get Kirk more playing time than he had been getting, assuming he continues using that role. So that should lead to at least a few more targets going forward.
How about you, Yates? Obviously, only the 3 targets, only the 2 catches, not that exciting. But, Murray only completed, 9 passes on the game. So 86 yards. Yeah, 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. This is a big winner for you.
Yeah, when you reel in 2 of the quarterback's 9 completed passes, I mean, the arrow's got to be pointing up, right? No, with Kirk, I'm optimistic moving forward. He's a fine, and I mentioned in this matchup he was a low-end wide receiver 3 in my rankings. So I think moving forward, the arrow's pointing up, but I think you're going to have to look ahead at the matchups and play the matchups game with Kirk. But again, you just picked him up off the waiver wire. You don't need to be relying on him necessarily week in and week out. So arrow's pointing up, but I'm not necessarily going to say, yeah, he's a top 24 wide receiver or anything like that.
On the other side of the ball, I think we can sum it up with everything is gross. But let's take Zeke here. He loses another 2 fumbles. Fumbles have been the problem for him all year. He does have 8 catches, which is great for half PPR or full PPR formats. Just 80 total yards. You saw Tony Pollard getting a lot of work. Their offensive line is really beat up at this point. Nathan, are you concerned at all about Zeke's rest of season outlook?
I'm a little concerned because of the offensive line, but I'd also probably sending out trade offers for him with how his game went with Pollard seeing plenty of the carries because of those 2 fumbles, but he is seeing more targets than he had been seeing, and especially with how much the Cowboys are going to have Dalton under pressure. He's been throwing to the running backs a ton when he's been under pressure, so I can see Elliott, especially in the PPR leagues, getting a lot of these targets and catches going forward.
Yeah, how about you, Yates? I mean, given the state of running back, it's not like you're dropping Zeke all that much, right?
Right. Yeah, we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but I'm concerned. But yet, at the same time, it comes with the caveat that looking at the running back landscape, it's not like I'm dropping him outside my top 10 or anything like that. So, yeah, I'm definitely concerned. When you have a running back who turns the ball over as much as Zeke has the first couple, or the first 6 weeks of the season, I mean, 5 fumbles, I think, and 4 of them lost, not great. So it's concerning moving forward. I don't know if you can rely on him. He does get, the bump up in full PPR leagues because of his involvement in the passing game with how much the Cowboys are continuing to throw the ball, even with Andy Dalton. So, yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, they did throw the ball 54 times, just 266 yards and a touchdown, 2 picks for Dalton here. Amari Cooper does find the end zone, 10 targets, 7 catches, 79 yards. CeeDee Lamb also sees 10 targets, also catches 7 balls, 64 yards. Dalton Schultz, just 4 for 35, and Michael Gallup, 6 targets, 2 catches, 23 yards. We talked about it last week when, after the Dak injury, Nathan, how much, if at all, we were downgrading the Dallas wide receivers, all the pass catchers, and our conclusion was not that much. We still thought that they'd be great, but this is certainly, despite the, the fact that Cooper winds up producing and and CeeDee Lamb was okay. This is not a great first sign for this passing game. So how do you view them rest of the season? Are you downgrading them?
Yeah, I definitely downgraded them a little bit. I was also concerned that Dalton might be spreading the ball out more than what they had been doing, so that would downgrade their top wide receivers some more. But it seemed like the target distribution was pretty similar last night than what it was the previous week. So I am concerned about the quality of targets they're getting, but I could also see the Cowboys losing like this most games, so they need to throw a ton of times each week. So even if they aren't being very efficient passing the ball, they should at least still have that quantity.
How about you, Yates? Are you concerned here moving anybody down?
Yeah, I'm concerned. Amari Cooper bumping him down just a couple spots. I mean, like Nathan said, they're going to be throwing the ball a ton still. So Amari Cooper should be fine. Michael Gallup's the one that I'm just plummeting. I mean, when my projections spit out Michael Gallup outside my top 40 for my rankings this week, I was like, no, I can't do that. Like, I can't put him outside my top 40. I should have left him outside my top 40. Like, I should have just leaned into it and not tweaked my rankings. So, I mean, with Michael Gallup, you have to be concerned. 6 targets, 2 receptions for 23 yards in a game that Andy Dalton, and Dalton looked atrocious, but Dalton throws 54 times. I mean, even if he does that again, there's no guarantee that Michael Gallup is going to be able to do anything with his targets. So, I'm not excited about Gallup moving forward. I downgraded him a ton.
And I do think that the injuries and just the ineffectiveness of the offensive line really does hurt Gallup, because I do think that he needs to be able to get downfield and needs the time.
Right.
And that's just not happening right now. So, yeah, I agree. Gallup certainly is the one who takes the biggest drop for me in my rest of season rankings. All right, let's get into the most traded players here. So what we have is our My Playbook feature, where people are allowed to import their leagues into it, and they get, custom advice directly for their leagues. With that, I have access to something on the back end that can show us the most traded players just since this week ended. So I can see right now, with the week ended, the people who are being traded the most. So what I want to do is pick out a couple of these guys, and I want to talk about what we think about this. If we rostered them, would we be looking to trade them? If not, would we be looking to trade for them? Then I'm going to throw out a few guys that I can see people are searching for in terms of, should I trade X for X? Some of them are wild. And then I will give you a couple of names that I think are more in line. So let's start with the number 1 most traded player since Sunday, and that's Devonta Freeman. That's 18 carries for 61 yards, plus a catch on 2 targets for -4 yards. Like last year, not really getting it done on the ground, but he had been chipping it in through the air. Now he's got the Eagles, the Bucks, Washington Eagles, then a bye. Nathan, if you don't roster him, are you targeting him as someone to add? If you do roster him, are you trying to sell?
So I have him as a low-end running back too the rest of the season. I think it really depends on who the running backs are on the rest of your roster. There's only so many running backs in the league that you can know that they'll play at least 50% of the snaps regardless of the game script. So because of that alone, he has value, but the schedule doesn't look great, and I don't see him having that many great games over the course of the season, but you can still at least count on him to have that floor of getting probably double-digit carries and a couple of targets each game. So if I need a running back, he's probably someone that I am targeting, because I can hopefully get him for relatively cheap. But if I have at least 2 other running backs that I can trust to start in most situations, then I'm definitely trading Freeman.
Yeah, Devonta Freeman to me is the poster child for how I feel about running backs this year, which is I don't really want Devonta Freeman. This is not a guy I really want to start. And he's 25th in my rest of season running back rankings, which is basically an RB2. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. How about you, Yates?
Yeah, I think it all depends on – this is a situation-by-situation, scenario. Because I think looking at Freeman, again, he's someone that I'm not necessarily wanting to rely on as my RB2, but yet you might have to. So it all depends on how desperate you are for running back, where you're going to lean on Devonta Freeman. But so I'm fine trading for him if you're absolutely desperate. I think he brings a safe floor every single week because he's getting the touches in this offense, but yet he's not someone that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to rely on Devonta Freeman.
All right, so let me give you a couple of names here just from running back, and let me know who you'd prefer rest of season. Nathan, would you rather have Devonta Freeman, or let's go half PPR, by the way, or DeAndre Swift rest of season?
Probably Swift.
Would you rather go Devonta Freeman or Darrell Henderson?
Henderson.
Devonta Freeman or CeeDee Lamb?
I think I'm sticking with CeeDee Lamb. I think he's looked too good these first few weeks.
All right, back to you, Yates. Same questions. Devonta Freeman or DeAndre Swift?
I'll take Devonta Freeman.
Devonta Freeman or Darrell Henderson?
I will still take Freeman there, but they're back-to-back in my rankings, I'm pretty sure.
So this is the range that we're talking in.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we're talking about running backs that you're like not like excited about,
right.
But we're basically going to give you a high floor of weekly touches, enough so you can roll them out there. How about CD Lamb, though? What about that one? I realize that's... Go ahead.
Yeah, it depends on if I need a running back. Obviously, if I have the running back depth, then, of course, I'm going to trade Devonta Freeman for CD Lamb. If I need a running back, then I'm sticking with Freeman.
All right, so the two most searched for trades. So that's what we have. We have who should I trade, and you can put in two names involving Freeman this week. Number one, Nathan, how do you feel about this one? Devonta Freeman or DJ Chark?
I think it really depends, but probably Freeman.
But that's basically the right value you're essentially saying.
So.
If you're wide receiver needy, that's basically where it is?
Yeah.
Okay, how about you, Yates?
I'll take Chark if I, again, this comes with a caveat if I have running back depth, but Chark didn't produce necessarily last week, but 14 targets. Like, I want to buy into that.
Yeah, Chark, I'll be mentioning Chark later in a different segment, but he's certainly a guy who I think in a vacuum, all things being equal, I prefer Chark rest of season. All right, let's go to another running back. Not surprising, guys. Running backs are almost always the most traded players because you have these guys who are not exciting and are not going to be week winners, but the landscape is just so dismal that people are like, can I have touches? Please, somebody give me some touches. And that comes with Antonio Gibson. Now, J.D. McKissic outsnapped Gibson against the Giants. Some of that was late in the game, though. Gibson had 9 carries for 30 yards. McKissic, 8 carries for 41 yards. Gibson, 5 targets, 4 catches, 25 yards. McKissic, 6 targets, 6 catches, 43 yards. So how do you view Antonio Gibson going forward, Nathan?
I'm definitely concerned about him. As you were saying, like most of the game, he was seeing relatively the same amount of playing time as McKissic, and then it was the end of the game when Washington was throwing the ball that McKissic was in there more. But we also saw Peyton Barber get a couple of snaps, more snaps than he's seen since week 1. So unfortunately, they're getting a third person involved in the offense, and it's something where they have a pretty decent schedule these next couple weeks, but then you get closer to the fantasy playoffs. They got the Steelers, 49ers, and Seahawks in 3 straight weeks, and all of them have been fairly good against the run. So by the time Gibson could potentially see the majority of the snaps, that's when he sees the hardest part of his schedule. So it would be hard for me to want to start him for most of these weeks unless he gains that starting role in these next few weeks.
How about you, Yates?
Yeah, it's concerning. I mean, Gibson 9 carries, McKissic 8, if memory serves correctly off the top of my head. So I mean, and then McKissic, of course, is being a factor through the air, and Gibson's seeing enough targets to be relevant, but it limits his ceiling. So I think he's a fine low-end RB2. He's kind of in that same range of a Devonta Freeman. I actually might prefer Freeman because he's getting more touches. So. But that's kind of where we're at. I'm not panicking necessarily to the point of like dropping him outside my top, 30, 32 running backs or anything like that rest of the season. But yet it limits his ceiling, which is a bummer.
And Nathan, you'd prefer Freeman to Gibson going forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Not by a crazy amount, but yeah, I'm there. So a couple of these Gibson might have also been the most searched for players in proposed trades in our tools. So some of these guys are, I think, pretty obvious choices, but some of them are close. So let's start. Gibson or Myles Gaskin going forward?
Oh, Gaskin.
Yeah, for sure.
Yates. Yeah, that's not really in the same tier. So if you're searching for that one and you're wondering if you should do it, yes, you should do it. Gibson or another one for me, not really in the same tier, Gibson or Ronald Jones?
I think I'm sticking with Ronald Jones.
How about you, Yates?
Yeah, I'm taking Ronald Jones.
Me too. Gibson or Devin Singletary?
Probably Gibson if I'm looking for more of a long-term option, but if I'm looking for a running back just like next week or these next 2 or 3 weeks, then Singletary.
How about you, Yates?
I'm going to stick with Gibson there.
Yeah, I have Gibson higher as well. Let's go to wide receiver here. Another guy who searched for Gibson or Will Fuller?
Will Fuller.
How about you?
Will Fuller. We'll talk about him.
Okay, Gibson or Jamison Crowder?
Crowder.
Yates.
Crowder, if Darnold's back. If Flacco's still playing, I don't want Crowder.
Stop speaking ill of the Jets, but that's fine. Darnold will eventually be back. Gibson or Hollywood Brown? Nathan.
I think I'm sticking with Hollywood Brown.
How about you, Yates?
In a vacuum, I'll take Hollywood, but if I need running back, I'll stick with Gibson.
Yeah, of course. If you need a running back, you can always stick with the running back, of course. But I agree, in a vacuum, Hollywood Brown as well for me as well. All right, final guy, not a running back. Hooray, it's JuJu Smith-Schuster. Last 3 games, 14 targets, 10 catches, 77 yards. That's mostly without Diontae Johnson. I'm not sure if the schedule matters for him, but it's not all that terrible coming up. Tennessee, Baltimore, but Dallas, Cincinnati, Jacksonville. So, I don't know. How do you view JuJu Smith-Schuster going forward, Nathan?
I think he can bounce back. I think even with Diontae Johnson coming back at some point, with Smith-Schuster playing in the slot, his role isn't going to change at all, regardless of what's going on with the other wide receivers. I think the matchups do help him a little bit because a lot of these teams on their schedule have been giving up a lot of yards to slot wide receivers. So that's pretty promising for if the Steelers want to take advantage of the best matchups, then he could be the one seeing more targets because of that. So obviously not as high on him as I was at the start of the season with Claypool breaking out and taking some of those targets. But I think he can bounce back from where he's been these past couple weeks.
So ballpark the rest of season ranking them for me. Is he in the mid-tier wide receiver 3 range, closer to wide receiver 2? Where is he?
Probably wide receiver 3 range.
How about you, Yates?
He's a high-end wide receiver 3 for me. Diontae Johnson just came out. He will practice on Wednesday. So I think, we just need to – I want to see what it looks like with all three of them on the field. We've seen Diontae Johnson in and out of the lineup before Claypool broke out and became a huge part of this offense. So I'm not panicking. I'm concerned, but I'm not necessarily panicking to the point where I'm going to just plummet him down my rankings. So I've got him as a high-end wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he's a high-end wide receiver 3 is probably plummeting him down your rankings, right?
Yeah, like Nathan said, comparative to what I was viewing him to start the year, for sure.
Yes.
But yet, at the same time, like, people are completely off of JuJu Smith-Schuster. Like, they're dropping him in some leagues. So
would you like to know just how off people are on JuJu Smith-Schuster? FantasyPros.com/NFL/trade. That is what you get when you see the most popular searches. Here are some of the most popular searches for JuJu Smith-Schuster. JuJu Smith-Schuster or Chase Edmonds. That's the number one most popular search. And again, that did not count last night, but we were talking about how everybody maybe was like, oh, wow. Still, I don't know where anybody's head is at. That's not a trade that you're making. JuJu Smith-Schuster or Hayden Hurst. Again, that's not where you are. That's not where you should be, unless you guys disagree, right? We're in a different ballpark as to where you should be. Okay, very good. Okay, now let's get a little closer, though, because these are some other ones. Would you take JuJu Smith-Schuster or the aforementioned Antonio Gibson, Nathan?
Smith-Schuster.
How about you, Yates?
I'll take Smith-Schuster.
Oh, you're reluctant, Yates, but I agree with that as well. How about or DeAndre Swift?
I think that one's a fairly even trade, so depending on what you need, but I think if I'm leaning one way, it's still Smith-Schuster.
How about you, Yates?
Same here, same sentiment. It's pretty close, but I'll lean towards JuJu.
Yeah, I think among all of us, the lowest guy rest of season is Tags, who's not on this podcast, which is upsetting, but he really was like, I'm done. I'm moving him all the way down. I mean, I'm interested to see where he has him rest of season, but I agree. I'm still holding him in that kind of high-end mid-tier wide receiver 3, but man, I would like to see some targets going forward.
That'd be
please.
real nice.
All right. Yeah, that'd be nice. But don't trade him for Chase Edmonds. People come on now. Get it together. Don't sell low. That's not what we're doing. In fact, we want to buy low and sell high, which is our next segment. So let's get into it, Nathan. Who's your buy low this week?
I think Mike Evans is someone that I'm trying to get. I've seen a lot of people kind of low on him with how much he's been dependent on scoring touchdowns, and last week he didn't score a touchdown and really wasn't targeted that much. I think this past week it had a lot to do with Jair Alexander, who at PFF, he's our highest graded cornerback. And before that, he was seeing plenty of targets. So even though Chris Godwin's back, Gronkowski's getting more involved with the offense, I still think Evans is going to see plenty of targets. And I think the schedule is relatively good for wide receivers for the Buccaneers going forward. So despite the poor game this past week, he's someone that I'm trying to get.
I think you can. Like, I think that he's a guy for sure to be able to get. So where, ballpark it. Do you do rest of season rankings, Nathan?
I do not do rest of season rankings.
So ballpark it for me then. Where do you have Evans as a wide receiver 1 still, or is he in the wide receiver 2 range?
I think low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2.
All right, let me put a couple of guys on the test. Would you prefer Mike Evans or AJ Brown?
Evans.
Mike Evans or Amari Cooper?
Evans.
Mike Evans or Kenny Golladay?
Evans.
Okay. All right. Very good. So then that is somebody who for sure I can almost guarantee you that you're going to be able to make a trip. And again, Yates and I talk about it all the time. We don't love the 1-for-1, same position in the same tier, of course. But I do want to get where your head is at.
Right.
And I think if you are valuing him higher than those guys, maybe not Cooper at this point because Cooper may go down, but I do think that you are going to be able to certainly get him at a price that you're going to like. How about you, Yates? Who's your buy low?
I'll throw out James Robinson, obviously running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that he scored last week, so his numbers were inflated, but he didn't have necessarily a great game. And I think that if you're hurting for running back, and you need an option, I think that you can get James Robinson lower than what you previously would have. Because again, we looked at that matchup and we said Detroit, like James Robinson should go off in this matchup. Again, he scored, which inflated his numbers, but yet he didn't have as big of a game as people were expecting. So I think, again, it's a relative buy low, but you can definitely get him lower than what you would have a couple weeks ago.
So where do you have him rest of season in your running back rank?
I have him at 13.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where I have him. So you'd prefer him, for example, to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right?
Correct. Yep.
How about Robinson or James Conner?
Those are pretty close. I think I have Conner like 1 or 2 spots ahead of him.
Okay. All right. So that's fine. So then like a borderline RB1. Out of curiosity, Nathan, do you view Robinson going forward as essentially a borderline RB1?
I'm probably a little bit lower on him. I'm still a Devin Ozigbo truther, and he was designated to return last week, so they're in the 3-week window where they can bring him back from injured reserve. So I think if he comes back, he'll at least take a couple of those carries that Robinson had been getting and potentially more, since I don't think Robinson has been playing as well as he did earlier in the season. So I could see that being a problem for Robinson going forward.
All right, but I do think, Yates, that you're right. This is the perfect time to try to buy low on a player like that because it's coming off a matchup that everybody is expecting him to smash, and he just doesn't. And in that case, people are going to be like, ugh, what am I doing? It was a little bit the same thing with Drake, although Drake, we had sort of, is he battling an injury necessarily, after they played the Panthers, everything like that. So I do like that sentiment. For me, it's Chark, and I mentioned him a little earlier. I think fantasy managers are justifiably frustrated. He has battled injuries the entire year. His production has been kind of intermittent, but he did see 14 targets last week after playing through an ankle injury. Now, it's probably, you probably would be better off waiting a week or two. They get the Chargers, then a bye. It's not like, obviously you're not going to get to play him in 2 weeks or anything like that. It's not like the schedule is that great going forward, but Minshew is you only live once quarterback. He's going to continue to sling it. And Chark is out there almost every snap. And he's now, as long as he's going to get a lot of those targets, they're going to be playing with a negative game script. I don't think the perception in the market is where his value actually is. I think it's more like him being viewed, at least I have Chark in a lot of leagues because I was pretty high on him coming in, and he's viewed when I sort of talk trade with people as like a low end wide receiver 3, and I have him ranked higher than that. So Chark, where do you have him ranked?
I have him as a low end wide receiver 2.
Okay, how about you, Nathan? Are you in on Chark, or is he somebody you're just like, I don't know, I don't really want to touch him?
Oh yeah, I'm thinking high end wide receiver 3. I think I definitely trust him in that range.
Yeah, and again, when I have sort of just been talking trade, people seem to have him, closer to like 35, 36. So I do think that the perception on him does not meet his actual value. All right, let's go to a sell high candidate. Let's start with you, Nathan.
I'm going with Kenny Golladay. He's someone that I don't think he's seeing as many targets as he was last year. He's had at least one big play each game, whether that's a touchdown or a long catch. So that's been helping his fantasy value to this point. But Matthew Stafford really hasn't looked as good as he has these past couple of years, so I'm just concerned about him and the Lions in general, and also looking down the way with his schedule around week 14 to 16 when you're in the playoffs. He faces Jair Alexander, who will likely shadow him. He faces the Buccaneers defense, who's been doing a really good job at stopping cornerbacks. So while I still think Golladay will play relatively well the rest of the season, I don't think he will play as well as I had thought when I drafted him.
Yeah, Stafford is one, we'll talk about some rest of season risers and fallers. Stafford's a guy who's been falling down my rest of season rankings because he's just not playing that well, and the whole Lions offense looks, a little out of sorts. So I like that call a lot. And I've had Golladay ranked a little lower, I think, than our consensus for the past few weeks, even since he came back. So I like that call. How about you, Yates? Who's a sell high for you?
We'll stick with the Lions offense. Let's go DeAndre Swift. And
that was my guy.
So
go ahead.
I love DeAndre Swift. I mean, he was someone that I identified earlier on in the 2019 college football season and saying like this guy is the real deal. And so it's not necessarily based on his talent. I think he can be a fantastic fantasy running back down the road when Matt Patricia is gone in Detroit. And this is more so looking at this backfield and saying, how many times are the Lions going to be up this big on a team where they can just run the ball? And again, you have Adrian Peterson on this roster. As long as AP is on this roster, he is going to receive carries. It's the same thing with LaMichael Pirine in New York and Frank Gore. As long as Frank Gore is on the team, he's going to see touches. So DeAndre Swift, I think he can be a fine floor option for you because of his work in the receiving game. He'll start to become more involved in this offense. But to the point, I mean, even last week, AP still out-carried him. So I just don't think that this is someone that we can look at and say, yeah, he's a locked and loaded RB2 moving forward. If you can get if you can turn and flip him with this game that he just put up and get a guarantee, like James Robinson, if you can flip DeAndre Swift for James Robinson, do it.
Yeah, he was my guy too, for basically all the reason that you said. And you remember Yates, I mean, we talked about it and you tweeted out, thank you for that I thought that they might come out of the bye and basically be like, okay, now's the time to get Swift more involved. And they did, but he basically still saw the same snaps as Adrian Peterson. And Kerryon Johnson is still out there on third downs anyway. And so I think this is also the exact type of player that fantasy managers get really excited about, right? The exciting rookie, you see the big game, you're like, this is great. They might not want to dig into the snap counts or exactly how much it works out. They'll just go and buy. So this is a guy to sell high. How do you feel about that one, Nathan?
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. People are valuing him that high. I definitely was a little bit excited with how last week went, but I also wasn't putting him in the running back 2 category after last week. I just saw the potential of, at one point in the season, he had the third down role, so maybe he could get that back. He's seeing more of the first and second down snaps. Maybe he can at least overtake Peterson and not see all of the carries, but maybe a majority at one point of the season. So there's the possibility that he could get to that range at some point in the season, but I wouldn't say that's the most probable thing that would happen either.
Yeah, that's the thing. And again, that is basically what we deal with is probability. So we have no idea how it's going to go. But in the end, I think we all agree that right now, most likely the perception of Swift in the marketplace does not match the most likely production that he's going to provide. Let's go now to rest of season risers and fallers. Let's start with running back, the most interesting position. Who's a rest of season riser for you, Nathan?
I think Henderson was someone that I've been impressed with these last couple weeks, and while Cam Akers, I don't think he will only see one snap going forward, but he's playing so much better than what the other running backs are that I could see at some point Brown seeing less of the third down work that Henderson could get more of. So even if Akers takes a little bit of Henderson's carries, I could see Henderson getting more targets in the future too. So before I was worried about it basically being a 3-person committee, I now see Henderson as someone who can continue to maintain his role and possibly expand it.
Yeah, he was definitely on my list. I had Henderson 34th coming into the week. He's now at 24th. So I feel a lot more comfortable with him going forward just because, again, sometimes I get what Sean McVay wants to do, but there's no denying when you watch Henderson run, he's clearly the most talented back that is playing right now at this moment. So, it's going to be hard to get away from him. How about you, Yates? Who's a riser for you?
Phillip Lindsay. I had Phillip Lindsay pretty low just because the injury, of course. We just didn't know when he was going to come back, what that looked like. And then the bye week, of course, just pushed that further off. But now having this Melvin Gordon situation hanging over his head. And the biggest part here is that Lindsay looked fantastic on Sunday. So I think with Phillip Lindsay, he moved up from 46 in my running back rankings to 32. So I'm still valuing him as an RB3 because I think he's going to split the workload here with Melvin Gordon. But if we get word that Gordon has been suspended, that he, whatever the situation turns into, then Phillip Lindsay would skyrocket up my rankings.
Yeah, he's somebody who, once this happened with Gordon, I think I kind of assumed that he would be suspended 3 games. I don't know whether or not that's going to happen. I mean, I assume something's coming down, and if so, then I agree Lindsay would go way up. But I do have him up there as well. I'm 30th as well. So I like the call as well. For me, you guys mentioned Darrell Henderson. I had DeAndre Swift as somebody who, even though, I do think he's a sell high, he certainly was a riser coming out of the bye. But the other big guy for me is Ronald Jones. I have been incredibly reluctant to be able to buy into this. Just because I've said continually, we've seen him look like he was about to take control of this backfield before. We've seen Bruce Arians get pissed over something small and bench him. But at this point, with the way he looks right now, I realize that Leonard Fournette has either been active and only in an emergency role or inactive the last couple of weeks, but it's really difficult. It strikes me as his leash has got to be longer than somebody who has just, oops, I fumbled. Okay, sorry, you're going to the bench now, and we're going to Leonard Fournette, given how he's performed the past few weeks. So he was 24th for me. Right now, I'm going to go through and do a sweep after this podcast, as I usually do, but he's 17th for me going forward, and I feel really confident on him. Nathan, out of curiosity, how do you view Ronald Jones going forward? Is he a safe running back, too, for you at this point, or is there still doubt in your mind?
I think I'm in a lot of ways in agreement with you. I'm not sure I'd call him safe, just because while logic seems to dictate that he's been playing so well that he should not be losing the carries that he's been getting, there's always the chance that once Fournette's healthy and if he has a bad drive or something, they could roll Fournette in there. So knowing that that's a possibility and that happened early in the season, that there's a possibility that it happens again. But right now, I think the most likely thing is Jones maintains control over that first and second down role in the Buccaneers offense.
All right, let's go to a running back faller for you. Who's a faller this week?
For me, we talked about it a little bit, but McKinnon, seeing how earlier in the season when running backs were hurt, he got to have that every down role. But in this game, it was Hasty who was getting that early down work, even with 3 of the other running backs either inactive or hurt at that point. So if they really don't seem to trust McKinnon in that first and second down role anymore, then even though at one point it looked like he could be the guy when people were hurt, I still don't think he is the guy, even if Mostert's hurt and Coleman doesn't come back yet.
How about you, Yates?
As far as thoughts on McKinnon or my faller?
Whatever you want to do, Yates. The world is your oyster.
Let's talk about Zeke. Again, it comes with the caveat that it's still Ezekiel Elliott. He's still seeing a ton of work through the air, so I can't plummet him down my rankings. But to have the perception of it was Alvin Kamara and Zeke, and you had Derrick Henry in kind of this tier below, but of course not a significant tier gap, but yet it was Zeke and it was Kamara as these two guys that were locked and loaded. Now I've dropped him down from 2 to 5. And when we're talking about these guys towards the top, that's a pretty significant drop. So I think Dalvin Cook has passed him. Derrick Henry for sure has passed him based on what he did this past week. So moving forward, I'm concerned about Zeke. I really am.
Who's the other one who passed him then? Because you've got Kamara.
I was hoping that
Henry.
You weren't going to ask that question because
I have to ask. Don't slip it past me.
I'm pulling it up.
Is it Jones? Aaron Jones?
Yes, it was Aaron Jones. Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yep, Aaron Jones at 3, Zeke at 5, and then Cook at 4.
I don't really have a huge problem with it. I still have Zeke right now 3rd, but Kamara, Henry, and Zeke, they're right there. I mean, Nathan, are you dropping him down? Is he still would he be 2nd for you rest of season, or would he drop down?
I think it's either 2nd or 3rd. I'd probably put Henry above him at this point, but he just sees so much of the carries. He'll see so many of the targets that the Cowboys aren't able to run that his floor is just way too high for me to be too concerned about him.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to kill you for that one. Yeah, it's it's a top 5 running back. It's like, what are you doing? Right. But yeah, I'm leaving him basically at 3rd. For me, my guy is Antonio Gibson, who we talked about already. This game really was. I had a lot more hope for Gibson rest of season, but I dropped him down. Right now, he is 26th in my rankings. He was 20th. I was buying in, so he's a faller for me for the reasons we discussed. Also, of course, the injury guys, Miles Sanders, who may only miss 1 or 2 weeks. Raheem Mostert, of course, they fall down. But performance-wise, it's Gibson. Let's go to wide receiver risers here. I got a couple of names that I kind of moved pretty heavily up my rest of season rankings. Let's start with you, Nathan. Who's a riser for you at wide receiver?
Someone for me is T. Higgins. I think he's just week after week continuing to be a part of the offense, where earlier when he had his first big game, it's like, okay, let's see you do it again. But he's been doing it again and again, seeing the majority of the playing time, seeing significant targets each week. This past week, A.J. Green was able to have a good week, but so was Higgins. His yards after the catch have been increasing, consistently seeing first down. So I think as a rookie who can get more and more involved in the offense, I'm excited about him going forward.
Yeah, we have been waxing poetic about Higgins for the last few weeks. We are definitely buyers. How about you, Yates?
I owe Will Fuller an apology. Looking at any start-sit show, any live stream that we've done the past few weeks, I've been talking about Will Fuller as a wide receiver 3 because he has a wide range of outcomes. That's no longer the case. I no longer believe that. I tweeted this out yesterday. Since going 0 for 0 for 0, obviously in week 2, here is what Will Fuller is averaging per game. 7.75 targets, 5 receptions, 85.75 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. He has scored a touchdown each of the past 4 games. This is a locked and loaded wide receiver 2 every single week with wide receiver 1 upside.
Yeah, no argument from me for sure. As long as he's healthy, he's someone who's got to be locked into your lineup.
Yeah, here's how drastic that. I mean, he went from 29 in my rankings to 17.
Yep. Wow. Okay, that's a big one. I like it. How about you, Nathan? Are you optimistic on Fuller rest of the season?
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely optimistic. I'm still at least slightly worried just because of how many weapons the Houston offense has. This past week, they were able to score touchdowns with all 3 of their wide receivers and their tight end and their running back, and I don't really remember seeing too many times where you get all 5 of your starting skill players all scoring touchdowns. So in weeks where the offense isn't as high scoring, I think it could always be one of the other wide receivers who ends up having a big game instead of Fuller. But as long as the offense as a whole is doing this well, then definitely Fuller should have a good game anytime the offense is doing this well.
For me, my risers, I'll give a couple of guys here. One is Chase Claypool, who I really liked. I was willing to spend a lot of fab on him. And I thought I was being pretty aggressive on my rest of season ranking, even from last week where I had him 42nd. But now I really have few concerns, even when Deontay Johnson is back. As I said on our last week's waiver wire podcast, I do just think that they're finding creative ways to use him, including, of course, rushing attempts at the goal line. And I think he's too talented. You just can't look at what he's done the past couple of days and his talent and say, nah, sorry. We're all healthy. You're going to take a backseat at this point to everybody else. I think they'll just get him involved. So I bumped him up right now all the way to 33rd. Another guy is Travis Fulgham, who I'm not sure I'm even high enough on yet. Fulgham has just gotten it done. I've been fading him. I had him 53rd coming in because I just said, all right, well, Alshon Jeffrey's coming back. Deshaun Jackson's coming back. Dallas Goedert's going to come back. Now you've got Zach Ertz out. And again, if the Adam Kaplan reports are true, he is going to stick in that X receiver role. I still have him only 43rd. I'm going to really dive into it later today to see whether or not I can push him up higher, because I do think now that even if Deshaun Jackson comes back on Thursday, as he's expected to, I do not know where Alshon Jeffrey is. I think the lack of Zach Ertz, I don't expect Goddard to play. They're down Miles Sanders. I think Fulgham has just earned a role in this offense. So I have him still outside of wide receiver 3 range rest of season, but he may creep in there going forward. Real quick, Nathan, what are your thoughts on Claypool and Fulgham going forward?
I definitely love Claypool. I think he's been playing excellent so far this season. As the snap count guy, I am a little concerned that he won't be on the field as much as he should be once Johnson is back. I know he led the team in snaps last week, but a lot of that is throughout the entire season, he's been the guy when the Steelers have been in 22 personnel, so 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, and he's been the wide receiver. And since the Steelers were up so much, they ran that more last week than they had in previous weeks. So that's why he ended up with more snaps than the other receivers. So I could still see him not being in somewhat 3 wide receiver sets going forward. But I think he's been playing well enough, and they've been getting him the ball when he's on the field. So even if he's not seeing all of the snaps, he should still be seeing plenty of targets and maybe some carries as well.
All right, let's go to wide receiver fallers here. Who's your faller, Nathan?
For me, it's T.Y. Hilton, which I know this has been kind of happening for a few weeks now, but I was optimistic he could have a big week this past one, but he's just not seeing any of the red zone targets. His playing time has been just fine, but it's the other wide receivers who are seeing the targets. Defenses are still respecting Hilton to be that number 1 receiver. The Bengals really hadn't been shadowing wide receivers, but this past week they put their best cornerback on Hilton, and that also contributed to him not having a great game. So even though he's on the field and he's still one of their top receivers, he's just not producing, and I'm not sure what it will take for that to get turned around.
I promise you will get no argument on this podcast at this point in the season from saying that Hilton is a faller. And I assume you can drop him, right? If you roster him, would you be fine with fantasy managers dropping him?
I would drop him.
I know Yates has no problem with that. Yates, let's go to your wide receiver faller.
I've got 2 names that I want to throw out. Obviously, Michael Gallup, we talked about him. He fell from 35 in my rankings to 47. So I'm out on Michael Gallup. The other one that, and I know that Nathan talked about him. I'm going to disagree with him here. It's Mike Evans. Mike Evans is falling down my rankings. Adam Leviton tweeted this out the other day. In the 3 games Chris Godwin has played this year, Mike Evans has seen a total of 10 targets. I just think that, yeah, he can make up for it with a touchdown, a goal line fade or whatever, and he's just a monster in the red zone, not going to deny that. But it's Chris Godwin being on the field that takes away this opportunity here from Mike Evans. And we're starting to see Rob Gronkowski become more of a factor in this offense. He's starting to see targets. Of course, we know that Brady loves him. So it's just concerning moving forward. I dropped him from 16 to 25 in my wide receiver rankings. And right now, guys, I would personally be taking Justin Jefferson over Mike Evans.
Wow. Okay. That's bold, but I like your boldness, as I always do. It's funny. Nathan, you view Mike Evans as a buy low. Yates, you are moving him down. I did not touch him in my rankings based on this past week's performance. The big reason is because I think he's still battling through injury, and whether or not that's going to, nag him all season long, which could hinder his production. I'm willing to bet that he will get healthy. It's a little tough because their bye week doesn't come, I believe, until week 13, so he could really use a bye week at this point. But I do think that when healthy, he will get more involved in this offense. So I'm just kind of more of holding him where I am. I do have him a little lower than Nathan. We talked about a couple of guys. Like I would at this point, I think, take A.J. Brown over him, for example, but he's sort of that very mid-tier, high-end wide receiver too. For me, again, Smith-Schuster's a guy who has fallen a little bit. He was 24th. He's now down to 30th. I continue to move Julian Edelman down. I mean, he was all the way at 40. I've even dropped him lower than that at 43 because I just don't see it happening for him. But nobody else of real significance. Real quick, let's talk about our QB and tight end risers and fallers. Let's start with your QB riser. Go ahead, Nathan.
So I tried to find someone, but Justin Herbert, I think, still is rising, even though he didn't play this past week. Ryan Tannehill is someone who I was considering as a riser until I looked at the schedule and saw how brutal it looked for quarterbacks in general, the defenses that he's facing. So even though he's been excellent these past 2 weeks, it's hard for me to be too excited about him with the defenses that are on his schedule. So outside of that, I don't think there was any quarterbacks that I was really moving up.
That's usually how it works, by the way. Just so you know, when you look at rest of season risers and fallers, quarterback and tight end, it's usually like, I don't know, a little bit. But I agree with you on Tannehill, but we always joke among the three of us that like the Titans just break any sort of, models that you should have in terms of what you're supposed to be looking at. So Tannehill did move up a tiny bit for me despite the schedule. How about you, Yates?
Yeah, it really wasn't anyone. I mean, you mentioned Stafford as far as a faller, so but he's only bumping down a couple of spots for me. Yep. It was just where the touchdowns went this past week. Otherwise, he would have had a great game. I think just looking, though, at Matt Ryan. I mean, Matt Ryan has been playing yo-yo throughout my rest of season rankings so far this season. I mean, it's just been up and down, up and down, up and down. So I think with Matt Ryan, I've got him just back inside my top 12. I think that now with Julio on the field, that was what he needed, apparently. So I'm not super optimistic, or I'll use Tags' phrase, cautiously optimistic moving forward on Matt Ryan. But for right now, I think we have to mention that he's moving back up.
No, I agree. I had him 14th. I moved him back up to 12th. So that counts as a riser this week. How about a faller for you, Nathan? Anybody stick out?
We already talked about him some, but Josh Allen, just the past 2 weeks, he hasn't looked as good as he did the previous weeks. He still has that high floor, though, but like I mentioned before, maybe not top 5 anymore, but still like 7th or 8th rest of season.
And Yates, your guy is Matthew Stafford?
Yes. Yep.
He is for me as well. Stafford was still, he was 15th. He's now 17th. I just, he's moved out of that streaming conversation even that I want to talk about with Stafford. How about tight end riser for you, Nathan?
Trey Burton was someone who stood out to me just because he's kind of consistently been seeing these 5 targets. He started the season on injured reserve, but he's been involved in the Colts offense. They like throwing to tight ends a lot. He basically took that Eric Ebron role that he used to have as the goal line tight end. So he had that rushing touchdown, which I don't think is very predictive for how he'll do going forward, but he also had a receiving touchdown. So he's someone that I probably don't have as like a top 12 tight end the rest of the season, but in the right matchups, I think you can start him.
Yeah, I love that call. He's clearly getting involved, and he has a bye week this week, makes it a little tougher, but I agree with you. He was my big riser. How about you, Yates?
Yeah, Trey Burton absolutely moves up my rankings. He was someone that I wasn't necessarily buying into, but after his performance here, we've got to. Some other names, Austin Hooper, moving up as far as his target share in this offense. You can't deny it, and I think that he's becoming more and more involved. He's now moved up into my top 12 tight ends this season, just based on the landscape. I mean, some of these other guys, I don't want them above Austin Hooper. And then another guy I'll mention, Irv Smith, just continues to rise up my rankings. He's becoming more and more a part of this offense. It's going to be interesting to see what they do coming out of the bye. Do they get him more involved? So Irv Smith, again, he's at 18 for me, so I'm not necessarily calling him a top 12 tight end yet, but someone who is absolutely rising up my rankings.
Yeah, Hooper was my guy. Also, in addition to Burton, he went from 17 to 13. So I do think he's basically pushing the envelope of a startable tight end. How about a faller? I didn't have a great name here other than Zack Ertz, I'll be honest. So what do you got here, Nathan?
I'm sure this guy has been mentioned probably more than once, but Evan Ingram for the Giants. He's had 4 targets over the past 2 weeks against Dallas and Washington. Those 2 defenses have been among the top teams allowing fantasy points to tight ends, and Evan hasn't been able to do it against these defenses. So if he's not able to do it against them, I don't know when he will do it.
How about you, Yates? I know you don't argue with Evan Ingram as a faller, so go ahead.
Tyler Higbee, I mean, for some, it might have been an oversight, but looking at the report, like, he was still a top 12 tight end for me in my rankings. That I just missed him last week. He's down 21 right now. I don't want him.
Right. Yeah, no, that's the problem with both of your guys as being a faller for me is that they were already both.
Right.
I had already,
right.
They had already jumped off
They
the cliff
just keep
for
falling.
me. Yeah, so I agree, though. Neither one of them is close to being a startable tight end. All right, let's finish up with very quickly a couple of listener mailbag questions. As usual, we answer most of them throughout the podcast, touching on different guys. So real quick, I'll let a couple of quick ones. Martin Sinicola, sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrect, asks, would you prefer Julio Jones or Stephon Diggs rest of season, Nathan?
I think Jones.
How about you, Yates?
Yeah, I've got Julio at like 6 in my rankings and Diggs at 8.
Yeah, I have Jones at 5 and Diggs at 9. So I would say they're both amazing, but I would prefer Julio Jones. Brad Reed asks, would you be willing to trade Todd Gurley to get back Julio Jones?
Yes.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
That's
an easy one to do. Sorry, there was a hesitation. Yeah. I was like, oh no, maybe I misspoke. But yeah, at this point, you value Julio exactly as you did pre-injury.
Yep.
I was cautious with my weekly rankings this week, but he, of course, showed he was healthy. So top 5 guy going forward. Last one, just vibing. Who would you prefer, Nathan, rest of season? Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, or, well, the other guy here was Ryan Fitzpatrick, so I'm going to assume that he's not going to be the winner. So who would you prefer, Tom Brady or Justin Herbert rest of season?
I think Herbert. I think I could see the Buccaneers winning some of these games, so then they're running at the end of the game. So I think Herbert sees more passing attempts, which leads him to be the better value.
How about you, Yates?
It's a valid argument, what Nathan just said there. So it makes me second guess this Buccaneers offense, though, is starting to click. So I think it's hard to move off of Brady. I have Brady at 14. I have Herbert at 18 right now. But give it one more week, I could easily see Herbert passing Brady.
Yeah, right now I have Brady slightly ahead of Herbert, although I need to factor in the fact that Herbert is now past his bye week, and I'm going to be thinking about that. But they're right in the same range. Yeah. I like both of them rest of season for sure. All right, that's it for today. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. Remind everybody where they can find more of you and your work.
Sure. I'm at pff.com. I'll have an article up today that has even more players to trade and trade for, along with the ones we mentioned today. And then Twitter, PFF_Nate Jahnke. That's JAHNKE.
Awesome. We will be back tomorrow with our usual start-sit show. I will talk to you then.
Thank you for tuning into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to tell us what you think in the comments section below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.